I finally finished watching the first season of Hayore Nyaruko-san, and by that I mean I watched the first episode, the last episode, and approximately half of the episodes in between. As I said in my last video on Nyaruko-san, this is not the kind of anime that would typically grab my attention, and in fact the only reason I was watching it is because it came right after Higurashi on Thursday nights on TV. After casually watching a few episodes here and there, it just struck me as the most average anime ever, and so I put the ball in your court and asked you whether I should continue watching or not. Pretty much all of you had either the exact same opinion as me or an even harsher opinion than me, so I was thinking about dropping this anime until a commenter by the name of Noctis Quadro introduced me to the Nyaru References blog. The web address was nyaruref.blogspot.com, but nowadays it can only be accessed through the Wayback Machine. This blog basically crowdsourced all of the references dropped by Nyaruko, which is a lot, and it did a really impressive job. This made the rest of the series a lot more fun to watch because after every single episode, I would immediately run to my computer and read up on all the jokes that I didn't get. Now bear in mind, I think that reference dropping can be fun for sure, but I don't think it really makes an anime good. Once in a while, an anime like this comes out, and I generally don't care for them. In fact, it often backfires, because when I try to call out some of these shows that are heavy with the reference dropping for being mediocre or even flat out bad, a lot of the defenders will just say something like, well, you just don't get the references. Like, dude, I probably get more of the references than you, they're just not really done in a clever way. So at the end of the day, playing the game of how many references do you get can still be kind of fun, but at the same time, it's not what I'm looking for in an anime, and it's not the reason why I'm watching anime in the first place. Now, one side note here, apparently a lot of the references in Nyaruko are to Kamen Rider, which is a show I knew pretty much nothing about until about 2 or 3 weeks ago when I just randomly caught an episode of the original 70s Kamen Rider on TV. While the show is extremely dated and I basically had no interest in it other than getting the source of all the Nyaruko jokes, I will say this, if I were a kid growing up in the 70s in Japan, I would watch the fuck out of Kamen Rider every single week. And if you grew up with that, I can kinda understand why you'd throw in so many references to it. But aside from the references, what does this anime have to offer? Well, as I picked up from the first few episodes, it's just another harem anime. The female lead, Nyaruko-san, is a great character, but on the other hand, the male lead, Mahiro, is infuriatingly bad. The minor characters are, well, just that, minor characters. They play a very small role in the show, and while for the most part they are kind of likable, they don't really do all that much. I would say that overall, at any given time, the quality of the show directly depends on whether Nyaruko's charisma outweighs the male lead's lack thereof. This was kind of disappointing for me because the one Lovecraft character I knew anything about going into the show was the Cthulhu, and the Cthulhu character on the show is basically just a hungry lesbian. And that's not the worst thing in the world, but I was hoping she'd be a lot more prominent. When you're dealing with a harem type of setup, I would say that some combination of quality and quantity is much more important than doing really well on just one of those alone. You're not going to have an interesting harem with 100 completely random girls, and at the same time, you don't want one of those girls to completely steal the show, and I mean that in an objective sense because of course you're allowed to have your own subjective favorite, but when one steals the show and nobody else matters, you don't have a harem anymore. I could compare this to what might constitute a good hand in bridge, which most of you probably don't know how to play, but bear with me on this. If you're going to have 5 cards in the trump suit, you would much rather have the king, the jack, the 10, maybe the 7 and the 6, than the ace, and then 4 really low cards after that, because once you've played your ace, you have nothing left. That's Nyaruko here, she's the ace, and once she's off the screen, you got nothing left to work with. On a final note, the opening theme is extremely catchy, as is the second season's opening theme, but it's not scheduled to air after Higurashi, so I'm probably not going to watch it. Final grade, single tilde. I wouldn't recommend going out of your way to watch this show, but if for some reason you end up watching it anyway, I strongly recommend checking out the Nyaru References blog, nyaruref.blogspot.com, available on the Wayback Machine.